Don't go thinking that wild animals only live in the wild. Sometimes they're just as at home in the concrete jungle of a modern metropolis. We're counting down the top 10 most extreme city slickers in the animal kingdom to find the country bumpkin that has the most tricks to survive on the mean streets. Discover that hicks from the sticks can learn fast when city slickers are taken to the most extreme. Earth is a planet of extremes. Extreme places and extreme animals. But some animals are more extreme than others. Join us as we count down to find the most unusual, the most extraordinary, the most extreme. One of the most famous fables attributed to the Greek writer Aesop is the town mouse and the country mouse. It's the story of what happened when a yokel went to visit a city slicker. Just like the country mouse, most wild animals find life in the fast lane almost impossible.
A cat! Help! He's coming! Help!
There are domesticated animals or pests that are perfectly happy living with humans. But we're only counting down the wild animals you'd never expect to find in the big city.
Well, said the city mouse, what do you think of the city?
Well, the food is good, but the dangers are terrible.
And nowhere is the danger more terrible than in the city of Darwin on the northern coast of Australia. Here, 100,000 people are under threat because our first contender has the city under siege. The coastal floodplains that extend for hundreds of kilometers on either side of Darwin are a playground for people who want to beat the summer heat. They're also home to the largest reptile on Earth. Swimming in to number 10 in the countdown is the saltwater crocodile. It's the most aggressive and dangerous of all crocodiles. And unfortunately for the citizens of Darwin, it makes no distinction between floodplain in and outside the city limits. Crocodiles looking for new territories move into the city, lured by the smell of tasty treats like this colony of fruit bats at the water's edge. Unfortunately, crocs also dine on unwary residents and their pets. Darwin Harbor covers more than 400 square kilometers, nearly 9 times the area of Manhattan. So it's easy for these unlikely city slickers to establish a territory unnoticed by the people around them. Of course, Darwin isn't the only city that has problems with giant reptiles.
It lives beneath the streets. It's killed 5 people already. And it's about to break out. Alligator.
According to urban legend, unwanted pet gators were flushed down the toilets of New York and survived to grow into monsters. In reality, the sewers are too polluted, too cold, and there is not enough sunlight for any alligator to survive for long. However, there are still alligators living in the Big Apple, not in sewers, but in apartments. In 2003, police in Harlem were called to an apartment that contained a 1.5 meter long pet alligator. When they peered into the room with a periscope, they discovered that the gator had an interesting roommate. A 200-kilogram pet tiger. Not surprisingly, the neighbors were less than impressed. Eventually, the tiger was safely tranquilized and transferred to an animal shelter. There are some animals that can never become city slickers, which is why the New York City Department of Health produced a list of creatures that are prohibited to keep in New York City. While the crocodile's been banned in New York, it's not all that popular in Darwin either. Yet, in Australia, saltwater crocodiles are a protected species, and their population is steadily increasing. This means there's more competition for waterside real estate. That's why Darwin has a local croc patrol. They're not hired killers. Their job is to take the crocs out alive. The crocodile has had to change its behavior very little to adapt to life among humans. However, coming up in the countdown, we'll meet animals that have learned new tricks to survive in the city. But then, unlike the crocodile, they don't have brains the size of a walnut. Our next contender is such a country bumpkin that usually people have to travel to remote deserted islands to find it. Most penguins are happiest far from human interference. Their breeding grounds are usually dirty, smelly, and very, very noisy. They're not the kind of creatures you'd like to live next door. Yet the penguin swimming in to number 9 in the countdown has the same problem as the crocodile. People went and built a city on its ancestral breeding grounds. Wellington is the capital city of New Zealand, and every spring it hosts some very special visitors. These little blue penguins are the smallest penguins in the world. For thousands of years, they've been coming ashore to find suitable places to raise a family, even when we've gone and built a city on their beaches. Little blue penguins are number 9 in the countdown because they found a way to make use of our buildings. The only trouble is that getting there can be risky. Once, penguins nested in burrows or under vegetation, but now we provide them with waterproof garages, tool sheds, and houses. We'd never know they were there if it wasn't for the way a nesting couple reinforces their pair bond by saying, "Hi, honey, I'm home." Most people will put up with a little lost sleep because they love having a penguin under the house. However, life in the city isn't always easy for these little birds. They have few defenses against dogs, cats, and cars. Humans have tried to help the penguins by making them a protected species, but despite our efforts and our interest in these little birds, they are not well adapted for life in the big city, unlike the contenders we'll meet later in the countdown. So far, we've seen two animals that only move into town in small numbers. But coming up next is a city slicker that arrives by the millions and gets stuck in some very tight corners. And later, we'll discover that in New York City, there's one bird that really does get treated like royalty. At Randolph Air Force Base in Texas, they're having trouble with the next contender in our countdown of extreme city slickers. Air traffic control is grounding all flights because when the sun sets, something much bigger than the U.S. Air Force is taking over the sky. There are so many wild animals living in caves close to the airfield that they can be clearly tracked by the airport's radar. A small blip grows steadily larger until it extends vertically past 2,500 meters and stretches 16 kilometers wide. It's made up of 20 million Mexican free-tailed bats. They pose such a hazard to aircraft that the Air Force suspends flights when they're leaving the caves. But in Austin, Texas, people have far fewer problems with animals that have become real city slickers. Up to 1.5 million Mexican free-tailed bats have taken up residence in an artificial cave, the stress gaps in the Congress Avenue Bridge. That's why Austin has two kinds of rush hour. The bats leave their home to travel high in the sky to feed on clouds of migrating insects. The city gets free pest control because it's estimated that every night the colony devours 250 tons of insects. That's the weight of a Boeing 747. But Mexican free-tailed bats aren't the only city dwellers who work and live in close quarters. There are more than 5,000 people packed into every square kilometer of Tokyo, which is why, back in the 80s, innkeepers came up with a space-saving idea. Commuters can check into a capsule hotel. Instead of a room, you get a 2-meter-long, 1-meter-wide capsule. It's air-conditioned with an alarm clock and a television. It may not be the Ritz, but at the equivalent of only $11 a night, the idea has caught on with businessmen eager for low-cost accommodation. Back in America, people are also building capsule hotels for bats. Specifically designed bat boxes are being attached to buildings as a way of welcoming bats into the city. However, Bat Central is still Congress Avenue Bridge, the largest urban bat colony in North America. It's so impressive that it generates about $8 million tourist dollars annually. This is one city slicker you want to have around. If you thought finding bats and penguins living in the big smoke was a little strange, you just won't believe your eyes when you see what our next contender has for brunch. And you'll be on the edge of your seat when we visit a cafe that's more restroom than restaurant. Our next country bumpkin is usually found in wide open spaces, like the Waterberg Plateau Reserve in Namibia, where it eats at a most unusual restaurant. On the menu is 1 ton of offal. Dinner is served for vultures. This is a supplemental feeding station for the birds we think of as the sanitation workers of the wild, constantly on the lookout for the dead and diseased as they circle high above the wilderness. However, across the Atlantic, there's another kind of vulture that's become very much at home in the city of Miami. Most of the human population is disgusted by the ugly urbanite at number 7 in the countdown, the turkey vulture. To become a city slicker, it's had to make a few changes to its lifestyle. Instead of trees, it roosts on skyscrapers, and it can soar using the hot air thermals that rise up from the concrete canyons below. Living in the city, the vulture has lost its fear of humans. It also lost most of its competitors and predators, which is why it's become the top bird in Miami. In the wilderness, the vulture's amazing eyesight and sense of smell is used to find carrion. But in the city, they're on the lookout for garbage. Every year, the city collects over 100,000 tons of trash, and this becomes an enormous smorgasbord for the vultures. Vultures are number 7 in the countdown, because it's only taken minor adjustments to their natural talents to let them thrive in the big city. Still to come are animals that have developed whole new behaviors to survive among humans. While you may not have seen our next contender, you'll probably have heard it. Hollywood uses its raspy cry as the sound of the American Wild West. It belongs to the red-tailed hawk, a bird usually associated with vast expanses of wilderness. So what on earth is it doing in New York City? Well, in addition to 8 million people, the Big Apple also contains pigeons, rats, and mice. And that was the lure for the most famous bird in New York. His name is pale male. This extraordinary red-tailed hawk has forsaken the wilderness and taken up residence on the exclusive Fifth Avenue. He arrived as a young male in 1991 and became the first red-tailed hawk known to settle in modern Manhattan. Since then, he's had 4 wives, 24 chicks, and turned New York into his permanent home. He even has a fan club. But pale male came to the city to hunt, and the Big Apple was a feast spread before him, especially the rodents and pigeons found in the 340 hectares of Central Park. Designed in 1857 by one of America's most influential landscape architects, it was hoped that the park would bring a bit of country into the city. However, not far away, there's another sanctuary that started out not as a park, but a garbage dump. In the 1800s, the worst place in New York City was a slum known as Hell's Kitchen. The neighborhood festered well into the 1970s until something wonderful happened in an abandoned lot. This is the Clinton Community Garden, a cool, calm oasis in the middle of a concrete jungle. And, as the name suggests, this really was the work of the community, as garden liaison Annie Chadwick explains.
There were abandoned cars, refrigerators, anything in this area. And there was a lot of drug dealing, violence, because this over a third of an acre was just open. The residents really wanted to build more of a sense of community and clean this area up. And as they were going by, they noticed that people had thrown garbage here, and tomatoes were growing out of the rubble from the garbage, the actual seeds. So it was about 1977 that the neighbors on the block said, you know, let's turn this into a garden. Let's really reclaim our neighborhood.
The garden is divided into 2 sections. One is given over to individual plots for vegetable and flower growing, and the other is a communal area with lawn and landscaped plantings. Humans are not the only ones to make use of the garden. Over 50 species of birds have been sighted, and more are added to the list each year as migrating birds flock to the oasis as a temporary place for rest and food. In the garden, they're also safe from another recent arrival in the city. Nobody helped pale male gain a foothold in New York, although his legions of followers are keen that he stays. It's a sentiment unlikely to be shared by the 8 million pigeons in the naked city. Our last 2 contenders have shown that high-rise living really is for the birds. But still to come, we visit a restaurant where the food has literally gone to pot. And later, why is this moose visiting the Anchorage Hospital emergency room? The next contender in our countdown of extreme city slickers is the most widespread wild carnivore on the planet. There are about 40 different subspecies of fox, and they all share a reputation for cunning and intelligence. We think they're sneaky because without night vision cameras, we can't keep track of their nocturnal activities. Yet the fox has no problem moving in the dark, thanks to its wonderful senses of sight, smell, and hearing. Foxes once had good reason to fear humans, but recently, things have changed. In places like London during the 1930s, the secret of fox became a city slicker. It started living in town because the new construction of low-density housing with big gardens made an ideal habitat. Now, the highest density of foxes in Britain is found in cities. As many as 5 fox families can exist in 2.5 square kilometers. That's more than twice as many as the best rural areas, and 200 times more than on some bleak moors. All around the world, foxes are learning that cities are the place to be, and yet they remain secretive. Most people who live in an urban area have never seen a fox in their neighborhood. Just like other city slickers in the countdown, the foxes come to town for food. Our waste contains far more food than a country fox could dream of, and it also attracts a living lunch. Of course, foxes are not the only members of the canine family living it up in the big city. Some pet dogs get to have a great time at Planet Pooch in Redwood City, California.
Come on, kid.
Hey, hey, how are you?
There you go. There you go.
Cody, come on. Let's go. Come on, Cody. Come on, let's go.
All right, Cody, have a good day. See you tonight.
There are 60 million pet dogs in America, and some of them have owners that work long hours. So instead of leaving them cooped up in the house, Planet Pooch offers these city slickers a home away from home.
Basically everything you can do for your dog except for the vet is here at Planet Pooch. We do daycare mainly, but we also do boarding. We have a groom shop. We have a store. We have the best trainer around.
Okay, so every time the dog looks at the other dog, they get it clicked. Good boy.
We have 3 different groups. One for puppy types. One for adult confident dogs, and one for usually over-the-top crazy dogs. Cody's a cattle dog mix, and Cody's just a great dog. He comes every day of the week. His dad's very busy. Good boy, Cody. He's been coming for about 5 years, and he has a great time.
Let's go.
Urban foxes can survive in the city without all this lavish care and attention. But there's a big difference between being a wild fox and a domestic dog. While urban foxes are solitary creatures, dogs are social animals and don't like to be left alone. After staying in daycare, a clean, happy pooch also won't need so much exercise and attention when its busy owner gets home.
You ready? Let's go.
Stay. 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 Stay.
And for those humans suffering separation anxiety, they can sit at the office and watch their pet play on a webcam.
Cody. Every day it's the same thing. Come here, Pop. Where are you? Okay, good. Okay. All right, easy. Sit. I know. Want to go home. I know. Okay. There you go. Good boy, huh? Did you have a good day? Huh? All right.
For dogs like Cody, every day's a good day. If only life were as easy for his canine cousin, the fox. A busy port would be the last place you'd expect to find a wild carnivore, and yet it can be home for this sly city slicker. In the country, foxes are often persecuted as pests. In the city, people have a different view and have started welcoming foxes into their gardens. And while people are encouraged not to feed foxes, these crafty city slickers will always accept handouts wherever they can find them. A small snack may be enough to lure a fox out of the darkness, but there's no hiding our next contender. It's the largest deer in the world. So far in the countdown, we've been looking at animals that are relatively small or secretive. But there's no mistaking our next contender. It stands more than 2 meters tall and has the world's biggest antlers. The moose is the biggest of all deer and was once only found in the wildest lands of North America. However, the wilderness also contains predators like bears and wolves, which is why in Anchorage, Alaska, moose are moving into the city. It's safe, there's lots of food, and there are plenty of places to swim. In winter, there can be well over 1,000 moose living in Anchorage. They've acquired a taste for city scraps and can be seen dumpster diving at Anchorage's best restaurants. The moose is number 4 in the countdown because in the city, it's changed its behavior. It's lost its fear of humans, which is why 1/3 of Anchorage's population has been threatened or attacked by these massive creatures. Some smart moose are actually looking both ways before they cross the street. A good habit, considering that over 200 moose are killed in car accidents every year in the city. Perhaps that's why one moose decided to go visiting in the Anchorage Hospital emergency room. Security cameras captured the moose having a look around the ER, much to the staff's amazement. More and more animals in the big city are getting caught on film these days because we're being watched all the time. The City of London has one of the largest surveillance systems in the world. The average Londoner is watched by about 300 cameras in the course of a single day. This constant surveillance has become a tool of social control because when you're being watched, and you know it, your behavior changes. The idea is nothing new. Gargoyles have been looming over us since 4000 BC. These decorated waterspouts were often carved into grotesque beings. The theory was that these eternal watchers would remind people about higher powers that must be obeyed, so it pays not to step out of line. Since surveillance cameras and gargoyles are no deterrent for urban moose, the people of Anchorage have adapted. By learning a little basic moose etiquette, it's possible to minimize the risk of dangerous encounters. If only it was as easy to deal with our next contender, a masked bandit that's more than capable of criminal damage. You don't have to be as big as a moose or as sly as a fox to survive in the big city. Although, as our next contender discovers, it's a good idea not to get stuck in the chimney. And later, we'll discover how one wild animal is trying to take over the city of Tokyo. Down on the farm, the raccoon has long had a knack for getting in trouble.
Look, a window.
Here, let me help you.
Look, great help you are. There.
What's in here? Funniest bird's nest I ever saw.
These masked bandits are number 3 in the countdown because they can get into just as much trouble when they move into the big city. So if you find a raccoon in your house, who are you gonna call?
Hey, Julian, got a call for you when you can write.
Yeah, go ahead.
Number 6th Street, Southeast, 2 adult raccoons in a fireplace. Copy?
Yeah, I copy that.
For Julian Carter of the Washington, D.C. Humane Society, getting a call out to rescue raccoons is all too common. That's because there can be 40 raccoons per square kilometer of city.
Come on in, I'm glad to see you. All the commotion and racket is coming from right over here, right in the chimney.
Well, how long have you been here?
Been since last night.
Raccoons have adapted well to life in the big city. With all those chimneys and houses, who needs to nest in a hollow tree?
Well, okay, I see 2 now. Yeah, give me a second.
And since they're omnivores just like humans, they love our food.
Let me take a look up here.
Using their nimble little paws, some raccoons have learned how to open refrigerator doors, unscrew jars, and even uncork wine bottles.
Oh, wow. Hey, looks like a tough customer. Let me get your cage away. That is a big raccoon. I think I'm more scared than he is. What do you got up there now, Julian?
I think it's one of their babies. Not too sure.
Wow. It's a big one or a little one?
It's a little baby.
Got the whole family here.
Raccoons are so at home in our houses that in spring, the Humane Society responds to about 4 calls a week to remove a furry squatter.
Okay, come out on this way. We'll take him out.
Usually the adults are relocated to a wooded area of D.C. But if they're injured or very young, they're taken to raccoon rehabilitator Tina Svensson.
Gums are whitish, so it's definitely dehydrated. I can feel by the scruff of its neck.
Tina volunteers her time to nurse the animals back to health, even if it means getting up 3 times a night to feed her baby city slickers.
All cleaned up. Yes, it is all cleaned up. If this one had not been found, it would have perished. And I'm very confident that I can help this animal, but there is that 50-50 chance that this little girl won't make it. My role is to be a surrogate mother to the little animals. We'll raise her. She would have normally stayed with her mother till she was about 8 months old. And even if they came from the city, I would try and teach them how to be an urban raccoon and eat berries and nuts and birdseed and, you know, an occasional cat food or dog food.
This looks better already.
Yep. They all have a reason to be here, and I think it's important.
While most people think that raccoons are lovable rogues, our next contender is hated by almost everyone in the biggest city in the world. There are 12 million people in Tokyo City, but they're under attack by our next contender, the crow. In the last 15 years, the Tokyo population of these aggressive birds has increased by 500%. More than 1/3 of Japan's crows are now found in the nation's capital, largely thanks to a combination of the enormous amounts of trash generated in the city and the crows' extraordinary intelligence. The birds have memorized the garbage schedules for different parts of the city, and they move in front of the collectors, removing food scraps from the plastic bags. Unfortunately, some birds don't limit themselves to trash. They'll terrorize people to get at their food, and if they get a chance, they'll purposefully take aim and poop on you. That's enough to put most people off their lunch. But not if you visit this restaurant in southern Taiwan. Here, diners are seated not on chairs, but toilets. Inspired by a toilet-shaped spaceship in a Japanese cartoon, the restaurant is called Martin, which means toilet in Chinese. Meals are presented in toilet bowls of both Western and Asian styles. The clientele of novelty-seeking young people come to play with their food and gross out their friends. Although some people still find the combination a little hard to swallow. Crows have no problems dining in the toilet, but other foods can be more difficult. This crow likes eating walnuts, although breaking open the tough shell is almost impossible, unless you learn how to make the city do all the hard work. Using a four-wheeled nutcracker is pretty clever, but you still run the risk of being flattened, unless you're smart enough to drop your dinner on a crosswalk. Only when the traffic stopped will the crow secure its snack. But not even this extraordinary bird brain can compete with the animal that's #1 in the countdown. We've seen the 9 contenders. They've found ways to survive in the big smoke. Only one animal is a more extreme city slicker. King Kong is the perfect example of what usually happens when you let a wild animal loose in the big smoke. However, the animal at #1 in our countdown of the most extreme city slickers proves that primates don't have to be more than 6 meters tall to cause chaos. From out of the jungles of Asia comes a monkey that's only 60 centimeters tall, yet it creates more mayhem than any Hollywood monster. It's the macaque. It's estimated that 48% of macaques in northern India live in close and frequent contact with people at all times. For generations, macaques have lived in cities because they know that people mean food. Up to 93% of their diet can be from human sources. Macaques are the only primate other than humans that readily adapt to life in the city. That's because their motto is, learn and eat. You can see this in action when you watch them trying to find ways to open a coconut. Often it's the young monkeys who solve the problem. They discover the solutions through play, and this may lead the rest of the troop out of difficulties. On hot days, there's a serious risk of dehydration, so some cheeky monkeys steal water bottles from tourists or each other, while other troop members have learnt to turn on water taps. However, not all these city slickers are harmless. Their sharp incisors can inflict serious wounds if you don't immediately hand over food. They've learned that women and children are easy targets. The threat of ripping off a woman's sarong is usually enough to score some food, and they're more than strong enough to mug a small child. Some monkeys use laundry in a different form of extortion. If you try to scare the monkey to get your clothes back, it'll run away and your clothes are gone forever. It's only when you throw the monkey food that you'll get your laundry back, more or less undamaged. In some cities, people are terrorized by street gangs of hungry monkeys. And yet the macaques have sacred Hindu status, which grants them immunity from any crime they choose to commit. These monkeys may be the biggest troublemakers in the countdown, but just like all our other contenders, they're only doing what comes naturally. Without their city skills, they'd be in real trouble, because their natural habitat is being destroyed as the need for more agricultural land in India increases. This is one rare case where the spread of urban sprawl has actually led to an increase in the number of these primates. And that's why, when it comes to wild animals making it in the big city, the macaque really is the most extreme.